Hello guys, welcome to another video, and in this one I'm going to be talking about my Tactician Twister build for Dawn of the Hunt, and discussing some progress for day 1. Now, this has been one of the worst league starts for me ever, and not necessarily for the reasons that you might expect, even though the build has been a bit rough to begin with there in the early game. But for me, I've had some of the worst performance issues I've ever had playing Path of Exile 1 or 2, and this has been way worse than it was at early access launch, which wasn't great, but it was still, it was still playable. And for this launch in particular, first we had all of the problems with sort of town instance crashing and things like that. I actually had constant crashes every time I was trying to go back to town, and at one point I actually attempted to log into town 11 times in a row and got the same error every time. And basically I just ended up not playing anymore for a while there because I just couldn't log in. And after some of those things have actually been fixed now, I noticed that I have really bad performance issues just generally playing the game. Loading screens take between 30 seconds and a minute. There's just ridiculous frame rate lag and all sorts of stuff going on. A lot of things which I didn't have back at early access, so I guess they've changed some stuff. So I'm going to have to look into that a little bit, see if I can change some settings up and get some better performance. I mean, right now I'm using DX12, but I can't even move to Vulcan because if I do, my game crashes 100% of the time trying to switch to Vulcan. So not a good start performance-wise, but let's talk about the build because I have actually been able to play the game even through the bad performance. And early leveling with the spear has been pretty rough, I have to say. The spear is a little bit underpowered early on, I think, and I started by using Whirlwind Lance, which felt okay for the first few levels, but of course, where I'm starting on the tree on the Tactician, there's all projectile increases and nothing for melee, so Whirlwind Lance only deals melee damage. So that kind of ended up being fairly weak very quickly there after I gained a few levels. And early on, I actually found a pretty nice combo, which was parry, disengage, and explosive spear. As soon as you're able to get explosive spear, that actually feels really nice as an ability. But it's especially nice if you have a frenzy charge to spend, because that kind of empowers the ability, it deals more damage, and it actually leaves an ignited ground effect on the ground for 4 seconds, I think, and that's really nice for an extra bit of damage. But that combo was really good anytime you're able to actually, parry monsters. In a few cases there, you occasionally find monsters that are very slow or monsters that just don't really interact with parry at all, and that combo doesn't really work. But Explosive Spear felt really nice. And then I think as I progressed through Act 2, I actually used Explosive Spear and Lightning Spear quite often together, because Explosive Spear is a detonator itself, and it obviously can be detonated, but it detonates Lightning Spear for a good amount of damage, so you can kind of throw them on top of each other, and they do quite well. I was using abundant support on Explosive Spear, so I had 2 of those, and then I was just throwing all 3 of those, the Lightning Spear and 2 Explosive Spears into pretty much every pack, and it was clearing like that. But at some point towards the end of Act 2, I actually decided to kind of go back to the Twister setup, because I did try it early on and it felt really weak, and I started to use Frostbolt, Whirlwind Lance, and Twister, which felt a little bit better, but still didn't feel great at that stage. So basically the idea of that setup is you use Frostbolt, and Frostbolt kind of is a slow-moving ice projectile. It's a spell. I unlocked it at the lowest possible level, so I don't have to spend much mana. But the main thing is that Frostbolt, when it moves along the ground, it actually has chilled ground underneath it, and that chilled ground stays on the ground for a while as well. And obviously, any Twister that you use that moves across chilled ground will take on that effect of the chilled ground, and it will have 50% of damage as extra cold damage, which is really nice because that means that, all of the monsters are slowed by the chilled ground, and they're also being chilled by the Twisters as well that hit them, and you're actually building up freeze there as well. So that's quite a nice combo to use. And of course, you're still using Whirling Slash there as well, because that's the main way of boosting up the damage. You're basically just dropping Whirling Slash every now and again, and your Twisters are coming back into the whirlwinds and actually consuming them to split off into another Twister and deal more damage. So that combo actually does work, and it kind of worked all the way into, late Act 2, early Act 3, which is where I switch now into the main kind of setup that I wanted to play on this build, and this is where the build really starts to come online. So for me, this is where the build has really started to feel really good. Before that, it kind of felt a bit iffy, and, the clear wasn't really there, or the damage wasn't there. Now it feels like everything's kind of coming together. The clear feels good, the damage has started to really improve as well. So that setup is the moment that you get Combat Frenzy and you already have ascended once on the Tactician, which means you have projectile damage inflicts pin. That means that you have an easy way to generate frenzy charges, and you also want to make sure that you link Profusion to Combat Frenzy, because obviously early on it has only one frenzy charge gained every 8 seconds or whatever it is, and so you want Profusion linked to it so that it has a chance to grant 2 charges instead of 1, which is really nice. It basically means on average you're going to be gaining 1.5 charges every time it procs. And then you also want to make sure that you link Perpetual Charge onto Explosive Spear, so it has a chance to actually do its Frenzy Charge part of the ability without actually consuming a Frenzy Charge. And this is when the build really starts to feel good. Every single pack that you come up to, you can just throw an Explosive Spear straight into the middle. That deals a really good amount of damage. I haven't even got it linked to any damage supports at all. It already deals really good damage. And then you can just throw Twisters straight through the middle, and you can use Whirling Slash then to empower those Twisters when they bounce around. So that setup is starting to feel really, really good, and the build, as I said, starting to feel like an actual build now. So let me just go over my current setup in terms of what gems I'm using and, what my gear looks like right now, what my passive tree looks like. So first of all, I'm using Twister here, which is obviously the main ability that we're using in this build. It's linked to Acceleration for more projectile speed, Persistence for more skill effect duration, and Retreat. So right now I'm not kind of using the full setup that I was planning to. This has actually felt a little bit better. I think having a longer duration on these is really, really nice. And then the Acceleration is great as well, because it just means there's more bouncing going on, more chance that it's going to come back and hit the target again. And then for Retreat, well, you get the damage here. It's 25% more projectile damage, but only if you've dealt melee damage in the last 8 seconds. So that's where Whirling Slash comes in. Whirling Slash deals melee damage. You can see I haven't even bothered leveling this skill up, because this build has literally no melee damage investment on the tree, no melee damage anywhere, nothing to increase up melee damage, because everything's projectile damage, so this doesn't actually do any damage, but it does still hit monsters, and it does still proc that 8 seconds so we can get our more projectile damage. So then we're using Whirling Slash, which is creating whirlwinds to empower those Twisters. So this is just linked to martial tempo. It means that we attack faster doing it. And then the other key piece of the build there is Explosive Spear, which is linked to Perpetual Charge, so it has a chance to not consume frenzies, and Suffuse, which is a new support, which is really, really nice for this build. So Suffuse makes it so that the ground effects created by the supported skill, in this case it's Ignited Ground, it gains 20% increased area effect per second up to 100%. So as long as it lasts long enough, it will go up to 100%, and because we've got a bit of skill effect duration on the tree already, this is going to last, around 5 seconds or something like that. On the explosion portion, which at the moment I believe it's 4 seconds, I don't know if it even says here, we go. So Ignited Ground duration is 4 seconds, but this is going to scale up a little bit, and you can already see this is dealing a good amount of attack damage as well. And you'll be able to see that in the footage actually. The Explosive Spirit itself is doing quite a lot of damage on its own. And then I have Thunderous Leap on its own. This is just a gap closer. It's mainly for leaping over terrain. Whenever there's like a gap in terrain, I can just, close the gap. And then we have Combat Frenzy, which is the other key piece there, with Profusion for a chance to gain an extra charge when it procs. Herald of Ash I've actually had from Act 1. It was the first thing that I got in terms of the Spirit Gem. Was using it for a bit of bonus clear, which was actually really nice. I'm not sure if it's really necessary anymore, but I've still got it active right now. And then we still have Frostbolt, and the reason I'm still having Frostbolt in my links here is actually because occasionally in like a boss encounter where there's no ads, it'll be the case where I may run out of frenzy charges, and so this Frostbolt is there just in case I want to be able to create an elemental ground effect to be able to then make the Twisters deal a bit of extra damage. And lastly, I have Wind Dancer right now, which I'm going to obviously use later on, but the reason why I'm already using is because I have an amulet that has spirit on it. It's as simple as that. Basically have some extra spirit, so I'm using Wind Dancer to boost up the evasion there. So let's just take a look at my gear real quick here. Nothing too special. We've got a spear with some damage modifiers on it. We've got some resistance here, a little bit of rarity. This gear is pretty garbage. I mean, this shield and these boosts, I've been using these from Act 1, I think, both of these. These gloves are actually quite nice. Good life roll there, some res, bit of added damage. These are nice. Some resistances on the belt here. Again, I think this is a level 5 helmet. But, it is what it is. And this body armor, I actually dropped this. And I thought, well, that'll do. That's probably going to carry me for a few acts. So I just dumped both of my Artificer's Orbs that I had onto this and put some resistance runes in there, and I'm going to be using that at least for a few acts, I think, which is nice. Got some life on there. Good regen roll as well, some chaos resistance, and it cannot be poisoned. It's actually really nice against some monsters that just poison you all the time. I found that I was taking big damage from those before. And then over on the passive tree, I can just show this. I haven't actually changed anything up. This is the same as it was in the plan. So just taking all of this projectile damage here to begin with, and then moving along down here, grabbing these two wheels because they're so important. The skill effect duration here and attack damage, really nice. And also this here for projectile speed. And then just grabbing these here, more projectile damage. And moving up through the ranger start. These nodes here are actually really good, this cluster of nodes. I get some movement speed, some evasion rating, some accuracy, projectile speed and attack speed, really, really valuable there. Pin and run for some movement speed, increase pin build up, and then grabbing some energy shield stuff here. The energy shield things right now are not doing too much, but I am gaining the evasion rating boosting from this, which is quite nice. And then some skill speed here. And I'm going to be pathing up here and just grabbing some, some more attack damage here. And grabbing all of this projectile stuff in this cluster. And then moving on up through here, and there's more attack speed here and energy shield and evasion stuff up here. And right up here, I'm going to be grabbing a skill effect duration cluster. But I think before I actually go for that cluster, I'm going to see how the build's feeling. Because these points here, you do get a dual socket here by pathing through and going up here. But I would only be going for this cluster right here, the energy shield and evasion, and this is a lot of travel points to get up to the skill effect duration, so I'm not convinced that this is going to be worth it. It might just be the case where I end up going for something else further down on the tree, some kind of, spear damage, things like that, or maybe even go for subterfuge mask or something around here, and then I actually just anoint one of the increased skill effect duration clusters, perhaps this one or one of the ones over by the warrior start. So that's the plan right now. That's the progression for the build. As I said, the build feels very rough early on. I think I saw a lot of people saying that the spear felt really rough early on, and I agree, it did feel very rough early on. But at some point there, you have those key components coming in. The combat frenzy and, projectile damage builds pin together is super easy frenzy charge generation, and you're just kind of generating charges all the time at that point. And then once you actually have that, you can really take advantage of those frenzy charge portions of the skill. Explosive Spear is really nice. And I have just unlocked Whirlwind Lance, which is the kind of extra component to this build. So this is not going to replace Whirling Slash, but it is going to be kind of an added part of the build, adding on to it. Whirlwind Slash is kind of important because it's that melee damage portion that is dealing a bit of melee damage to then enable the support that's dealing extra projectile damage on Twister. But Whirlwind Lance is going to be really important to be able to significantly boost damage, because this consumes a frenzy charge, and then it will create a stage 4 Whirlwind, which is kind of absurd. And that is going to be really, really strong in terms of how much damage you get whenever a Twister passes through that. So this is something that I've literally just got my hands on, and I'm going to be using that in the build coming up now. But that is pretty much it, guys. That is the overview of the day 1 progress. I know there's a lot of outrage going on the Reddit at the moment, so we'll see what GGG do to respond to all that kind of stuff. But that is the build so far. How are you guys getting on with this build if you're playing? Let me know how you're getting on if you're just playing Spear in general. Perhaps you're playing Spear Huntress. Let me know how your progression is going. And thanks for watching this video, guys. As always, stay tuned and stay safe.